Not a lot of things in NIL that anger me, frustrate me, that get my attention because I think players should have been paid for about the past 50 years. This really bothered me. Steve Sarkisian came out and said that Arch Manning will not take any NIL money till he's the starter. Well, that's not likely to happen this year. It could be 2024. Quinn Ewers came out of spring as probably the starter. Arch Manning is also battling with another underclassman at Texas. So he may never be the starter. He may be a huge bust. Who knows? I don't think that's going to be the case, but who knows? I don't know the kid. But Steve Sarkisian comes out and says he's not going to take any money until he is the starter at Texas. That bugs me in a lot of different ways. Because is that to say to the young man who comes from a more difficult, more challenging background that he's not worth NIL money till he's the starter? Is that to say that the money that Texas generates between now and whenever Arch Manning is the starter, that Arch Manning wasn't a part of because he was a big splash in recruiting and he brought guys in? I don't think Steve Sarkisian meant it this way, but it really bugs me that he would say that. Also, I don't really believe it. I have trouble believing he's getting zero NIL dollars. Now, it might not be publicly, but the Mannings are very, very, very orchestrated. I could tell you stories about the Mannings that would blow your mind. They don't do things by accident. Caleb, you know this. I have trouble believing that there's no money promised. And I found it very, very insulting to other players that didn't come up in the first family of football, that aren't rich for the rest of their lives, despite what happens in the game of football. I just found it disingenuous and I found it insulting in a lot of different ways. What were your thoughts, Caleb, on Steve Sarkisian saying Arch Manning doesn't get his NIL money until he's a starter?
Yeah, that bothered me a lot too. It's one thing to just not do it, and it's one thing if Arch Manning and the Manning family don't want to do that and they want to keep that quiet, but to publicize it, the only intention is to virtue signal and grandstand on behalf of Arch Manning and say, look at this high moral character this guy has. It's really rich, by the way, because I made my case for Peyton Manning as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but Peyton Manning, year after year after year, until his final year in the NFL, refused to play for $1 less than his market value, which I understand that, by the way. You should, particularly for the sake of the players union and for negotiating leverage, you should always, I've always said you should take as much as you can get if you're playing in the NFL. But if you're going to do that, it's hilarious that Peyton Manning would do that. And then they would create this whole thing of of the Manning family saying, we're not going to take any NIL money because we want to earn it as a starter. I'm with you. I have a huge problem with it, particularly when anybody who watched Bryce Young last year, Bryce Young was the first guy to get $1 million NIL deal, and he got it before he played a game.
Right.
Anyone who watched him can tell Bryce Young didn't play any less hard because he was getting paid. He played his butt off. And who looks at Bryce Young and thinks, oh, well, not a great leader, no intangibles. No, we think of Bryce Young as one of the highest quality quarterbacks we've ever seen in the SEC, particularly for his size.
Here's my question too, and some of you are going to get mad at me, but I'm sorry. I know how orchestrated the Mannings are. My question is, did they want this to come out through Steve Sarkisian, or is he just a football coach and not a PR guy and let it slip out? If it's orchestrated to the point to put him out there, then man, that's disheartening. It's just a terrible position to put everybody in that's not a starter. What if a guy, okay, let me give you an example. Dylan Sampson, he played a significant role last year, right? I'll give you another example. Princeton Fant. He started some games. Jacob Warren started some games. Is he not supposed to take any NIL money because he's not a, air quotes, starter? There are all kinds of ways to contribute to a football team. You are worth something. That's the whole point. I mean, to some extent, the preferred walk-ons that are basically blocking dummies are worth something, right? It just, the whole thing came across as just really pompous. And I was very, very disheartened to see that. it to me undermines a lot of what NIL is trying to do.
What if this was a 3D chess move by Steve Sarkisian? Now, hear me out.
Oh my gosh. I mean, okay.
What if this was something? What if Arch Manning is not taking any NIL money now and said that to him? And what if the Manning family said that to him? What if Steve Sarkisian put it out there from a public way? Now the Manning family can't back off it. They can't take Arch Manning can't take NIL money until he starts because it looks bad. What if he did that to make sure there's more NIL money available for other recruits for now?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I mean, my gosh, but there's so much money in Texas. I mean,
I know that, but what if they're trying to redirect the money?
They got dead dinosaurs everywhere in Texas, and they're pumping them into oil. I mean, would his cash between now and then really affect Texas's collective NIL cash?
Given what Arch Manning would be worth if Nico's worth $8 million, Arch Manning is probably worth $8 million. $8 million can get you a lot more extra talent. Look, Texas, I mean, we talk about this money. Texas hasn't had a number one recruiting class in what? I don't think ever since recruiting rankings have been out. I don't remember a year where Texas had the number one class. You might, Dave. You covered it more than I did.
I don't remember. He's already worth 7 digits.
Yeah.
I don't care if he says, I don't want to play football. I want to go hang out with Shia LaBeouf and tour the world and search my inner soul. He's worth $1 million and what he's done for Texas. It just, to me, there are two types of coaches. There's the type of coach that is orchestrated in what he says, and he says it for a reason, and he wants to play the media. That coach is Philip Fulmer. That's the type of coach. And Philip did that, and he did a good job at that. There were times where he would come out and say the offensive line didn't practice well. They'd come out and have a great practice the next day after they read the paper. There's another type of coach that doesn't two bleeps about what he says and how it's taken. That type of coach is Josh Heupel. I don't know which Steve Sarkisian is, but I would check that at the door because it just came across as really pompous. And I'll tell you what, if I'm a young man of much, much lesser means, which almost every prospect is, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, man, that's how they do business. It almost, in some ways, it elevates him to this status by saying he doesn't get paid. Just a really dumb comment of the week.
And let's talk about layers of means here, because we're not just talking about like poor kids who this is their ticket out. You could be an upper middle class kid. You could be a rich kid even, and you still don't have the means of the Manning family. You still don't have the luxury to do this. And so, like, you could be from a family that makes $400,000, $500,000 a year, well off, very comfortable. That NIL money you still notice that if you're not getting it, unlike if you're a Manning. So but let's go back in history for a second, Dave. I will say something's always kind of bothered me. Look, I've thought about this with the Mannings for a long time. And I've told you, I think Peyton Manning is the greatest quarterback of all time. I take him over Tom Brady. I don't care what anybody says. Y'all can come at me. I think I give him, I don't knock him for not taking pay cuts because I think he was looking out for the union as a whole when he was taking the most amount of money. I do think that.
But he does like money though.
Oh, of course. But they actually, the players union tells, I know this with the NBA. LeBron was trying to take a pay cut multiple times over to get more talent around him. And Chris Paul and the players union said, don't take a pay cut because if you take a pay cut, then you give the owners leverage in their next collective bargaining negotiations because they can say the best player took a pay cut. And so the union asked their top players to take all the money they can. That's why nobody in the union complained about Aaron Rodgers getting that $50 million deal. What I would say with Peyton, though, let's go back to the night. What this kind of reminds me of is Peyton Manning's decision to return for a senior season at Tennessee. We act like that was an emotional, great, mature decision of wanting to graduate and come back to college, as if there was no politicking involved of, I don't want to get drafted by this team, which would have been the Jets. And as if Peyton Manning didn't have the means to come back for his senior year. I think, and I've always thought this, I don't know how you feel, I always thought it was a much bigger deal when John Henderson chose to come back for his senior year. Defensive tackles have a much shorter shelf life. it's not like he could control where he gets drafted, and he did not have the means of the Manning family.
Yep. Here's what Steve Sarkisian should have said. Okay. Here's what he should have said. First, I want to tell you that I'm not wearing contacts. I'm not wearing glasses because of Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn is your home for vision correction or just eye care. They've got the individual eye care facilities that you can go in, and that can be your regular doctor. But if you need LASIK like I did, or you need cataract surgery, their laser center is unparalleled, and it's local. The local doctors are fantastic. Here's what Steve Sarkisian should have said. Again, Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn. Jokingly, I don't need the money. I'm not really worried about that. Boom, it's over. It's not a headline. It's nothing. Instead, you make a headline. And Steve Sarkisian has been a head coach long enough. Now, maybe at Southern California, you don't make as big a waves as you do if you're in Texas or the SEC. But if he hasn't learned to this point that you make big waves by those statements, then I hope he's learned now, because I guarantee you on the recruiting trail, no question, I bet my pinky toe on it, and I only have one left. He will be asked. That's another story, Caleb. He will be asked by a prospect, with this NIL, do I have to be a starter to get my NIL money? He's going to be asked. It's a stupid statement. One that I don't think Josh Heupel would ever make. It just, to me, it's a guy that's been in the press conference a little bit too long, and he wants to be cute.
Maybe Sark is just not as bright as we thought.
Maybe not.
I mean, this guy we've seen multiple lapses in judgment, one due to a problem, I grant you, but ask Falcons fans about Sark when he was our offensive coordinator.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, maybe he's not. I mean, this to me just doesn't reek of brightness, of intelligence. It's the exact opposite. And I think it's insulting to a guy like Nico. I think it's insulting to any other player. Listen, you do a job, you deserve your money. I mean, he showed up. I assume he's working hard, unless they've got some sort of problem, and you can always run him if you wanted to. Imagine running Arch Manning and how that would affect your public perception. But you can always do that. Just don't even talk about NIL. I like Josh Heupel's approach, where he just basically says, that's somebody else. I don't talk about it much.
Yeah. So let's go here. Real question, because Lane Kiffin got fired and they hired Steve Sarkisian. You're looking for a head coach right now. There's no alcohol issues. Who are you taking, Lane Kiffin or Steve Sarkisian? Wait,
alcohol issues on the hiring end or their end?
On their end. You are sure there will be no alcohol issues.
Oh, I'm still to this day taking Lane Kiffin if I'm a destination job. Okay, like Ole Miss to me is not a destination job, but they've done all right with him. But if you're a destination job, if you're one of the top 15, 20 programs like Tennessee, I would hire Lane Kiffin a million times over Steve Sarkisian. It's not close. You?
And USC fired Lane Kiffin.
I know. But Lane hadn't adapted at that point. He needed some comeuppance. But right now, that's who I would hire. You?
I would too. Hell, I said in 2017, Tennessee should have hired back Lane Kiffin. I really thought they should have hired him back. Like, you know how gutsy that would have been?
Well, he may or may not have had interest via my text messages. So, yeah, I don't think it's close. I think Lane Kiffin would be the hire over Texas. But, you know, we'll see. I don't know that we're ever going to know the true greatness of Lane Kiffin as an offensive coach as long as he's at Ole Miss.